Zenith VR is a game designed with the community in mind. It has a ton of features to gather your friends and create things like parties or guilds. But I know for a lot of us, we just aren't in that situation. So what if you were alone, the only one of your friends that was interested in Zenith? How much more difficult would the game be if you had to complete it by yourself? Don't worry, the game was developed so that you can play alone, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I spent countless hours grinding my account to level 40 and completing every challenge Zenith put in front of me. And I'm going to go in depth on the difficulties of playing alone and how you can maximize your impact as a solo player. Because there really are just some things you can't do in the game as a solo player. But with this guide, I'm going to maximize your chances of beating the odds. So let's go. Your first task in Zenith is to create your character. And here's my firm belief on the most optimal class for a solo playthrough, and just a friendly reminder, you're not locked to these choices, it's just a recommendation guide. First, let's cut down the Blade Master class. The reason Essence Mage stands out in a solo playthrough is solely for one factor: range. In Zenith, it is common for hordes of enemies to swarm you, and if you have to battle all of them at close range, a barrage of hits will come from all directions, and you might get knocked out instantly. Picking Essence Mage factors out the possibility of all this damage. There's more time to react to ranged attacks, and more time until the enemy reaches you to melee. It also gives you a massive advantage of getting the first shot before the enemy targets you, because as a Blade Master, you're gonna have to get right in their face to hit them, and these enemies will target you before you even get your first strike off. As for the subclass, there's a matter of preference because each subclass does have its advantages to others, but DPS stands out as the subclass to choose. The only drawback from your health going down to 0 is a quick walk back. Survivability isn't as important. And without the increased damage, the amount of time to complete Zenith will extend quite the amount. And my preference was completing the game in a timely manner over a 1-life run, because the more grinding time implemented, the less fun the game becomes. So let's go in depth on the Essence Mage DPS subclass and how you can take advantage of your kit. Already we start at the blasters, because they do have special properties. Your blasters have multiple stages as you hold the trigger to charge them up. There are 2 major visual stages, but 3 major audio stages. During the first visual stage, you can hear it charge up to stages 1 and 2 on the audio side. And the second visual stage occurs in between the second and third audio stages. All this information is difficult even for me to understand, so the timeline should help you understand when each of these stages happen. This is important because the damage ramps up not in 2, but 3 waves. So you may just assume it's related to the audio cues, as there's 3 of them, but you would not be correct. Damage stage 1 starts at the first audio cue, as soon as you start charging. It produces a significantly lower damage output. The second damage stage begins at the second audio cue. There's no visual change yet, and it produces nearly double the damage. Now, the third damage stage is quite interesting. It does not begin at the third audio cue, but actually at the second visual cue. As soon as you notice your blaster starts sparking, that's when you let go. It doesn't produce a lot of extra damage, but it is noticeable and only takes half a second more of charging from stage 2. Your mana, or rage, but I'm going to call it mana for simplicity, runs out quickly with the high requirements on your godstones. So don't waste your mana. If you're versing standard weak enemies, mana conservation isn't that important, but when you're versing strong opponents with a long time to kill, it's best to keep enough mana to bombard your enemy with damage by the time you stagger him with blaster shots. There are some techniques that use mana, I'll get into in just a moment. Conserving mana really requires a balance of damage and restraint, because doing damage with your abilities and mana is important, but remember, they do recharge. So if you're able to balance it and have your mana regen by the time you stagger him, you'll just get optimal damage. Mana isn't the only thing you need to manage, your stamina is just as important. You may go in with a full bar of stamina, but as soon as you get targeted by an enemy, your stamina will start decreasing from sprint. Sprint is your fastest getaway when your teleport is offline, and with enemies needing to close a distance to attack you, you'll sprint away quite often. So always take the time to regenerate your stamina when you see an opening. The best time to do it is if the enemy you're fighting has a charged ability. When they charge it up, it allows a few seconds to run away and get some stamina back. The enemy will even have to walk back towards you after it does its charged ability, giving you valuable time to regen your stamina. Another good way to regenerate stamina is after teleporting, but you need to teleport strategically. If you teleport into the enemy, that doesn't matter. You might want to teleport onto high ground above it, or just really far away from it. And the last of the 3 main general ideas is to value your range. Keeping your distance is more important than you think. As you get more experience, you'll be able to dodge attacks consistently, but if you're just starting out, it's hard to know which enemies will do pity damage or pack a serious punch. But all around, the safest option is just to keep your range. You do have ranged abilities for a reason. This gets extremely important when you get to dungeons and bosses, which I will go over later in the video. Now let's get into your individual godstones, some important information about them and how you can use them to your advantage. Your teleport is extremely versatile. It can be used as an escape tool or to quicken your route. Your teleport can also take advantage of the mechanics of Zenith. When you pull out your teleport beam, it looks for any standable surface and then turns blue if it detects one. but that standable surface does not need to hold your entire body, only just enough of it. You can use this knowledge to latch onto walls and reduce your climbing time, or just avoid climbing in general. Don't forget to use timed abilities. Abilities like your fireball, your snowball, or even chilling loop do not have a mana requirement, so you might end up forgetting to use them. It's free extra damage that you do not want to miss out on and adds up nicely to the enemy's stagger meter. Your Blazing Barrier Godstone is extremely powerful. There are two important techniques to do with it. The first technique is a basic initiation technique, best for large health enemies. Take as many strikes as you can of the Blazing Barrier before letting the enemy aggro you, and you'll get a few free hits. Because of its large radius, the enemy will likely stay in the fire for the entire duration, not only giving you multiple ticks of damage, but important stagger progress. The second technique is very useful in things like collect or hunt quests for a large pool of easy enemies. Run around until you produce a train of enemies running towards you. Gather them up and spam your Blazing Barrier. It's a quick way to slay a lot of easy enemies. For some reason, a lot of the enemies just didn't get hit by the fire, but I swear, normally it does work. Gale Force is a mixed bag with the buggy movements of enemies. I usually stick to Blazing Barrier over Gale Force. The damage output has a higher potential, and Gale Force itself isn't very consistent. Normally, Gale Force will damage and push back an enemy. Pretty useful as a tool to run away and gather stamina while also getting in some extra damage. But there are special cases where it just doesn't work. Some enemies with charge attacks will not budge when Gale Force is used as they charge up. And some enemies who are already in motion will just disregard Gale Force and teleport back to where they were. It is miles better than how it used to be. It was way buggier on the game's launch, but still I prefer the consistency of Blazing Barrier. And now your ultimate. It's trash. Your ultimate is really not good. It's in a similar space with the Fireball and Snowball, a Godstone on a timer to add some quick extra damage. But with the large gesture and 4 orbs you have to throw, it isn't too appealing when your blasters and other Godstones produce a similar amount of damage in the same amount of time. Plus, after you activate it, there's a timer before it goes away, so you are rushed to use it, making it easy to miss. As you begin the early game, one thing to keep in mind is to collect as much as you can. Gathering only a few tiers will get you important levels in stamina, and chests give you not just important materials to boost your gear, but sometimes the gear itself. And speaking of gear, make sure to prioritize the uncommon and unique gear, whether it's collecting them out of a chest or crafting them. Even if your gear is the same level, that uncommon or unique status will boost the stats and give key modifiers. These higher tier gears can last longer than their common counterparts, even if the high tier is multiple levels behind the common. And it's very useful, especially in the early game, to craft these. With the game's changes to the quest lines in the first few areas of the game, you get your first 10 levels incredibly fast. It makes those first few collect quests almost obsolete because you don't need the XP. And even if you spend your time collecting in the beginning area, by the time you get to the next area, you'll have to collect a different material. And why go back to the Fractured Plains to collect Sylphid Horns, when your main quest will have you be slaying rangers in the Amorite Forest for essence seeds? There will come a time in the game that grinding is very important, but it is not the first 10 levels of the game. And when you're collecting or crafting, take note of modifiers that these things can have. For example, one of my blasters has the modifier Breath Stealer. Every 3 seconds, if I get a killing blow, I get extra stamina. So it just changes my playstyle, it doesn't leave me stamina dependent. I'm allowed to be more aggressive and waste more stamina, do more funny tricks, jump over them, do stuff like that with this stat. I'll link the list of all the modifiers in the description below. This entire website is made by Easy Community, and it is my favorite resource for anything Zenith. Oh, and one more thing about the Godstones, make sure you're using their modifiers correctly. There are 2 different modifiers for cooldown Godstones and mana Godstones, so just make sure you're actually using the right one. I have tested it before, and a cooldown modifier will not change how much mana it requires. Make sure to stock up on hunt quests. Even if you don't prioritize pursuing the quest, playing the game in itself will warrant you getting enough kills to complete the quest. It's free extra XP that you'll probably end up forgetting about anyways. Cooking quests are always something you should get started on. There are key recipes like rosemary noodles and any of the smoothies that'll be important later on in Zenith. It really comes to light when you're about to get to the dungeon bosses, as their large health pool and your vulnerability makes any advantage a game changer. Group quests are the quests that are questionable, as they have group in the name, which makes sense that you alone would have a hard time beating these. But what's nice about these quests is that they don't give you rewards that you will need to proceed through the story, and unless you're in an XP crunch, you won't need to ever do them at all. That being said, it is possible to complete the earlier quests when you're severely overleveled, but due to the effective level mechanic, you will still have a hard time on all of them. And just in case anybody needs to know, the effective level mechanic is just to make sure that you are not over-tuned for an area. If you are level 40, your stats will be decreased in the Fractured Plains to match a level 6 player. You're still overpowered, yes, but just a little less strong. And the big one for the quests is always to do your side quests. Even if you've leveled up and you're able to do the main story, there will come a time where you'll need to grind XP to level up. It's easy to forget where all the NPCs are and which quests you did, so making sure you complete all of them in the area before you moved on will save a lot of confusion. So do your extra quests, whether it's dailies, adventure rank quests, weeklies, do them. XP is important. Zenith's biggest challenge will be the dungeons, because the endgame is more just the mid-game with slightly stronger enemies. So these are your real challenge. Obviously, once you unlock them, it pairs you up with a few other players, but before you can do that, you still have to play through them yourself in a simpler manner. And because a lot of the players are going to be high level now, you might not find a lot of people trying to complete the same quest you're doing. These versions of the dungeons will not have the puzzles, but the boss still remains. Depending on your skill and evasiveness, the level you need to be at to consistently beat the boss varies. But if you do these things, you can up your chances. First, make sure to defeat enough of the small enemies to take enough space to maneuver around. It varies, as one dungeon might have only one enemy that gives you half the map, while another might have upwards of tens of enemies that will make fighting the boss nearly impossible if you don't slay them. And monitor your area as these enemies will respawn. Make sure to learn the boss's attack patterns. It might seem difficult at first, but each attack is vastly different. Some will have glowing indicators giving you time to escape and not even have to worry about what attack it is, and some attacks have obvious indicators like a charge up or projectile shots. The more you play, the easier it is to remember and avoid taking damage. Next, don't let the boss heal. This one is important. An enemy will heal if you walk too far from it out of combat. Minutes of progress could be disregarded in a single second. Find a balance between the boss and the range that will heal the boss. And lastly, take your time. Nothing in Zenith, aside for a few timed quests, have a time limit. The game is made for you to play at your own pace. A boss can erase you in just a few hits, so running away and getting your stamina, or taking the time to slay smaller enemies will go a long way. And those are the main solutions when it comes to playing alone. The endgame of Zenith, as I said, is more just the mid-game, quests and grinding. Since you unlock the endgame dungeons at a high level, those tips don't act any more different than the first dungeon you unlocked. I do hope I helped you here. I get a lot of comments from people who are on the edge of buying the game, so if this was one of your factors on not buying, don't worry. It doesn't matter, you are good to play alone. Thank you for watching.